My name is Anna Mitchell. I'm 30 years old. That day, I walked into a lavish beachside wedding in California, where my father, a well-known businessman, was about to marry his third wife. Surrounded by opulence, glittering crystal lights, and the loud chatter of high society, my father stood up to introduce me to the hundreds of guests. He spoke with pride, but ended his sentence with, "This is my daughter, Anna. She's just a security guard." Ripples of laughter spread through the room. I sat there in silence, my heart aching, feeling as if the entire world had simultaneously denied my worth. In his eyes, I wasn't a professional, not a decorated military veteran, but just a failure sitting on the sidelines. But only minutes later, everything flipped upside down. The large screen in the hall suddenly displayed breaking news. Anna Mitchell, senior security specialist, just dismantled an international crime ring last week. The room fell silent. The same eyes that once looked down on me turned to shock, and my father dropped the wine glass he was holding. And that was only the beginning. Because right there at this very wedding, I uncovered a far more dangerous plot. One that would have drawn blood if I hadn't acted in time. Have you ever been publicly dismissed by someone you love? What would you do if your true worth only surfaced in a life or death moment? Share your thoughts with me in the comments, hit like and subscribe to follow this story because what happens next will take your breath away. I never thought I'd look into his eyes again with such a deep, quiet disappointment, not because of what he did, but because of the emptiness I had tried to ignore for so many years. My father, Robert Mitchell, a man who always appeared with the perfect tie, slicked back hair, and a smile that never skipped a beat, stood among the rich and powerful as if he were the center of a universe built from payrolls and stock portfolios. I remember clearly the last meal we shared 6 years ago. It ended with a line he threw at me without even looking up. "If you give up your Columbia scholarship to join the military, I have nothing more to say to you." I can still hear the sound of his knife slicing through the tender roast beef on his plate as he kept eating like my life was just another failed equation. I stood up, gently placed my napkin on the table and walked out of that penthouse, never looking back. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just felt like I had been severed from a part of my own flesh, something I thought had long since died but clearly hadn't. My mother passed away when I was 14. She was a high school English teacher, someone who read Emily Dickinson every Sunday morning and always told me that ordinary people fear what they don't understand, because they can't see the beauty in things that go against the grain. My father, on the other hand, had never read a poem without a graph next to it. To him, every value could be translated into profit. After my mother died, I lived with him. My high school years passed in SAT prep centers, summer internships at law firms, and dinner parties where he introduced me as the kid heading into finance, bright future. I didn't hate those places. I just couldn't breathe in them. I tried. I sat in front of mirrors, wore blazers, practiced saying, "Sorry to interrupt, but I think," with the perfectly tilted 45-degree smile he taught me. But it always felt like wearing a mask that didn't fit. After my mom's death, the only person in the family who truly listened to me was Aunt Evelyn, my mom's younger sister who lived in the suburbs of Portland. She used to be a combat nurse in the Marines. Beneath her silver hair and calm voice, she had a pair of eyes that always looked at me like I was someone she had understood for a long, long time. It was during one visit to her that I saw a group of Marines training at a nearby base. I watched them in the rain, wet boots pounding the concrete, their voices loud and sharp. I remember how they looked at each other, not with judgment but with absolute trust. I enlisted right after high school graduation without telling my father. When he found out, he stormed into my dorm like I'd committed treason. He stood in the courtyard gripping my enlistment papers, eyes blazing with fury. I told him just one thing: I don't need you to be proud. I need to live as myself. From that day we were practically cut off. I served 4 years, deployed twice to the Middle East, came back with a long scar on my back and a much clearer view of the world. I didn't come back a hero, but I came back strong, calm, and, most of all, independent. After my service, I used a military grant to study criminology. During school, I worked nights in the university's security department. I started off walking cold, quiet shifts and ended up designing risk protocols for international conferences. I didn't choose this path because it was flashy. I chose it because it had purpose. At 27, I was recruited by one of the top private security firms in the country, Sentinel Group. There, I was no longer Robert Mitchell's daughter. I was Anna Mitchell, a risk analyst who could read behavioral patterns from microexpressions, who once successfully intervened during an assassination threat against a high-ranking politician abroad. For the past 3 years, I've been the director of strategy, coordinating high-level operations, advising quick response teams, and occasionally showing up in the field myself. Not because we were short-staffed, but because theory means nothing if you don't understand the fear people feel in real danger. I never shared any of this with my father. I didn't need to. Because every time I tried, he'd cut me off with something like, "When are you going to get a stable office job?" Or, "Does that line of work even come with decent insurance?" And yet, 3 months ago I received his wedding invitation. A thick, gold-trimmed envelope that read, "Robert Mitchell and Catherine Wells cordially invite you." No handwritten note. No apology. No, "How have you been?" I nearly tossed it. I didn't need another round of words to make me feel small. But then I remembered something Aunt Evelyn once said before she passed. You don't need to forgive to show up. But sometimes, your presence is the only thing strong enough to make them look in the mirror. So I went. I booked my own flight. Reserved my own room at the resort, even though the invite said I could use the VIP suite reserved for family. I wasn't family. I was Anna. I went because I needed to look him in the eyes. And this time, I wouldn't lower mine. I brought no expectations. I just wanted to see things clearly, one last time. But what waited for me wasn't the usual look of disapproval. It was an entire plot that would force me to draw my gun in the middle of my own father's wedding. I spent most of my childhood in the kind of silence people often mistake for comfort. My mother, a gentle, principled woman with a kind soul, taught me to walk through life with a steady heart, even when my legs trembled. After the divorce, I lived with her in a small rental apartment in northern Seattle. No pool. No designer closets. But the smell of toasted bread on Sunday mornings, and the sound of her reading by the window on rainy afternoons. I learned how to live simply. No showing off. No comparisons. Every book I read was a treasure. Every A I earned was a promise that I could still go far, even without a father by my side. I only saw my dad on weekends per the court order. Those visits were never something I looked forward to. He wasn't cruel. He just believed everything in life could be measured by salaries, school rankings, and job titles. His penthouse had it all: bulletproof glass, smart temperature control, a living room sound system that could rattle the floor. But the one thing I searched for every time I walked in, a real hug, never existed. He never yelled. He never asked how I was doing. He just didn't see me. I was a calendar event between meetings with Asian banking executives and Houston real estate investors. He always stressed I had to get into the Ivy League, major in law or finance, then Dad will make sure you get a place in Uncle Dan's hedge fund office in Manhattan. Every time I said I liked survival training, he'd sigh and shake his head like I was speaking nonsense. "Don't waste your youth on things with no roadmap, Anna," he once said in his usual monotone. "I'm not paying for you to waste time on rock climbing or running around with guns like some movie kid." I stayed silent. The day I submitted my enlistment application, I didn't tell him. I kept the form in my pocket, walked out of the high school courtyard with a strange sense of relief. When I sent that application electronically, it felt like something inside me had finally unlatched. I didn't have to become someone else anymore. When he found out, his reaction didn't surprise me. What shocked me was that he summoned an entire family dinner just to criticize me. Under the yellow lights of a well-known Italian restaurant in downtown Seattle, in front of relatives from both sides, he said through gritted teeth, "She's just doing security work. No future." The table fell quiet for a few seconds. My aunt turned to stare into her glass of water. The uncle next to me forced a polite smile. I sat straight, held my knife and fork with composure as if it were all just a play. But something inside me had cracked. Not my pride, but that fragile hope that one day he might understand. 4 years later, I returned from my final overseas assignment with a scar across my shoulder and a Bronze Star medal tucked quietly in my backpack. I'd led a team in an emergency situation, carried an injured child out of a danger zone under gunfire. But to my father, it was still just military work. Something he saw as temporary, unstable, without a future. The only time he ever called me during my entire service was when the news ran a brief story about me helping protect a U.S. diplomatic delegation under threat at a European summit. The article didn't mention my name, just a photo of me crouched on the ground shielding a senator as the response team moved in. He called the next morning. But not to check on me. What were you doing there? Showing up on TV like that reflects poorly on the family's image. That was an important diplomatic event. I paused a few seconds, then simply said, I prevented a mass shooting. Still, you should have stayed out of the camera shot, he replied, then hung up like he was talking to a financial assistant, not his daughter. I learned to stop expecting him to be proud. I had teammates, commanding officers who trusted me, survivors who sent thank you cards months after recovering. I had reasons to wake up every morning without feeling like I was living someone else's life. But deep down, even if I hated to admit it, I still wished he'd call me my daughter, the security expert, not the girl doing security. I didn't need him to understand every technical detail, just to acknowledge that the path I chose had value. Catherine, his fiancée, was a successful, sharp woman known in the commercial real estate world. I had never met her before, only knew she used to be the CEO of a luxury hotel chain that stretched across the West Coast. I didn't hate her. In fact, I admired her quiet strength for being the one who somehow made my father open his heart again after 2 failed marriages. When the wedding invitation arrived, what surprised me wasn't that he remembered my address, but that he hadn't left me off the list. My name was printed on the card, not scribbled in after the fact. Maybe it was a secretary's mistake. Or maybe, just maybe, he wanted me there. Melissa, my closest friend who served with me in Iraq as a combat medic, was the first to say, "You should go, Anna. Not for him. Because you've outgrown him long ago." I thought about it all night. Not to decide whether I could forgive him, but to decide whether I was strong enough to face his eyes again. Then I booked the ticket. I chose a window seat, traveled alone, brought just a small suitcase and a simple black suit. I wasn't going to impress anyone. I was going to show up, clearly, firmly, unapologetically. I didn't know how my father would react. But what I didn't expect was that this wedding wouldn't just be a cold family reunion. It would be the place I'd have to use every skill I ever learned just to keep him alive. The same man who once declared I had no future. The flight to Los Angeles was quiet. I carried a small suitcase packed with only 2 outfits, black slacks and a white blouse and a sharply tailored dark gray suit, clothes that wouldn't draw attention but helped me feel grounded in any crowd. No lace, no silk, no flowy dresses. I wasn't going to impress. I was going to be present. The rental car took me from the airport toward Malibu under the soft evening light. The ocean peeked through the trees, golden sunlight spreading over the water. In the car, I got a text from Melissa. If he says, "Just a security guard," again, look him straight in the eye and smile. You've lived your life just fine without his approval. I smiled, but a knot formed in my chest. I wasn't mad at Melissa. She was strong, blunt, and had once pulled me out of heatstroke during our final training in Fort Bragg. But I wasn't sure I was as indifferent as she wanted me to be. Sometimes what you claim not to need is exactly what you've always quietly wished for. The resort was perched on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, like a glass castle, elegant and cold. The gatekeeper checked my name, nodded politely, and let me in. Nothing in his expression said he recognized me as the groom's daughter. It was fine. The ceremony was set for the next morning, but guests had already started arriving. Most were names I vaguely remembered from childhood. Bank partners from New York, a hedge fund founder who once made Forbes, the global marketing head of a luxury wine brand. Everyone arrived with a spouse, everyone laughed and clinked glasses like the whole world could be measured in stock options. I stepped into the main hall to check in. No one turned to look. I walked straight to the front desk. The young receptionist, seeing my name, immediately bowed slightly and handed me the key to a pre-reserved room. I didn't need to guess. My father had arranged it. Still that same cold, calculated courtesy. Never forgetting logistics, always forgetting emotion. The room was on the second floor facing the sea. When I opened the door, lavender oil filled the air. A small card on the coffee table read, "Welcome, Anna. Wishing you a peaceful stay. Signed, Catherine." I read it again and again. Her handwriting was beautiful, precise, gentle yet firm. I'd never met her, only seen photos in the papers. If I trusted my instincts, I'd say she was cautious but not cold like my father. Maybe she was the one who made sure I was included. Maybe she was just doing what was proper. I didn't want to guess. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the resort grounds, away from the main crowd. I followed the stone path down to the beach, kicked off my shoes, let the sand sift through my toes. The waves lapped gently. The sky was clear. It was beautiful, but I still felt out of place. Not because of the scenery, but because this place wasn't built for people like me. No scuffs, no sweat, no readiness for danger. Everything was too smooth. That evening, the welcome party was held in the back garden, under strings of golden lights hung across the sky. I arrived on time wearing the gray suit, hair tied low. No makeup. No frills. I told myself I came here for me. Not for anyone else. The first person I saw was my father. He was talking to 3 men in dark suits, whiskey glasses in hand. When his eyes glanced past me, he paused for a moment, then walked over. "Anna," he said, no smile. "You made it." "I was on the guest list," I replied, keeping my voice even. He nodded, motioned for me to follow him toward the group. "This is my daughter, Anna Mitchell. She works in security." He dragged the word security out like he was choosing it carefully. One of the men asked, "Security for which company?" "I'm director of strategy at Sentinel Group," I answered. "We provide high-level protection for political and corporate events." The man nodded, visibly impressed. But my father quickly cut in. "She used to be in the military. Now, it's kind of like private security, but a step up." I looked at him. Under the warm yellow lights, his face was calm. Just like the time he called me the girl with no future in front of the whole family. I didn't argue. Just gave a small nod, then quietly stepped away from the group. I walked to the bar and ordered a soda with no ice. I never drink when I don't know who's standing beside me. "Why didn't you let him introduce your real job?" A familiar voice came from behind. I turned around. Melissa was standing there, dressed in a simple black dress, her smile light and effortless. "I thought you were in Houston," I said, surprised. "Sentinel sent people to assist with logistics for the wedding." I volunteered. I didn't ask further. I just felt relieved. She was the only person at this entire party who made me feel like I didn't have to keep my guard up. "You okay?" she asked as we walked toward the west corridor. "I didn't expect him to change," I said softly. "It's just, hearing the same thing over and over for 10 years gets exhausting." Melissa stayed quiet for a moment, then gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Someone like you doesn't need to prove anything. But if the time ever comes, what you do will speak for you." I gripped my soda cup tightly. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I knew it could happen, and maybe sooner than I thought. I didn't know whether my father did it intentionally or not, but he always had a perfect sense of timing when it came to making me feel small. That night's dinner was held in the west courtyard of the resort, under a canopy of golden lights strung between rows of palm trees. Every chair was wrapped in white silk. Every glass of wine came from Catherine's private cellar. The men wore dark Italian suits. The women clinked their pearls in champagne glasses like the world had never tasted dust. I sat quietly at a table near the service station, like a shadow amid all the glittering things I never belonged to. When my father approached with a group of guests from San Francisco, I remembered each of them from photos he'd proudly shown off at some investment seminar. I knew it wasn't going to be simple. He gently patted my shoulder, smiled the way he always did in front of television cameras. "This is my daughter, Anna Mitchell," he said. "She works in security." A middle-aged man in the group tilted his head slightly as if trying to understand better. "Oh, security, like a bodyguard?" My father chuckled softly, then let out the sentence I knew he had been holding on to all evening. "Not quite that. She's just a guard." He didn't say it loudly, but loud enough for the nearby table to pause their conversation for a beat. I heard a light chuckle to my right. A blonde woman with a wine glass raised her eyebrows at me with a kind of amusement veiled in pity. I set my drink down softly, kept my back straight, eyes locked on my father. He didn't flinch. Just sipped his wine and turned away as if the performance had ended. Melissa looked at me, her eyes ready to slam her glass onto the table. But I signaled her. "Not now. Not here in front of all these people." I left the table in silence, walking toward the dimly lit left side of the courtyard, a place I could breathe without choking. I didn't need his validation. I'd lived long enough to know my worth wasn't defined by how others chose to label it. But what made me angry wasn't that he belittled my profession. It was that he dismissed the very thing I fight for every day to keep people alive. I stood by a decorative lamp post, quietly observing the scene. Soft music floated in from a live band at the far end of the garden. Servers passed by carrying silver trays, the smell of baked pastries drifting in the breeze. Then something caught my eye. A server, a young, tall, slim man, was standing next to a lamp post across the courtyard, but without a tray. He wasn't speaking to anyone, wasn't looking at any tables. His eyes were sweeping the exits, like someone trained to assess targets, not refill drinks. I tilted my head, studying more carefully. The uniform sleeve was tailored wrong, the collar slightly crooked, a tiny detail, but one I couldn't miss after years of outfitting and inspecting staff uniforms. He wasn't alone. On the opposite side of the courtyard, a female server was moving, but in the opposite direction from the rest of the team. She wasn't carrying a tray either, but kept checking a watch on her wrist, a watch that didn't match any of the resort uniforms. And I noticed her left ear held a small black plastic piece, an earpiece. That was the first signal. I turned toward Melissa. She was standing with two colleagues from Sentinel, smiling at guests but stealing glances my way. I lifted my phone and typed a short message. Watch the server team. 2 individuals not matching resort staff roster. There may be more. A minute later, Melissa broke away from the group and walked over. You sure? I can't confirm just by uniform. But their eyes, they're not here to pour wine. They're mapping the place. Could be outside contractors? I saw the staffing list before arriving. Catherine accidentally forwarded it to the general email. This resort doesn't outsource primary service roles. Melissa nodded. I'll text logistics. Have them check internal cameras, entry points. We won't escalate unless we have to. I turned back toward the party. Guests were still laughing, music still soft. But through my eyes, the courtyard now looked like a strategy map. Key zones, escape routes, shadowed edges. I took a deep breath. That brightly lit courtyard could very well turn into a scene of chaos. I walked back toward the main group. My father was still chatting and laughing. Catherine stood beside him, her face no longer holding that magazine-perfect glow, but something more real. Was it worry? Hard to tell. I moved slowly toward them, keeping a faint smile on my face. If anything was about to happen, I had to be near the center. Not to be the star of the story, but to protect lives, whether or not someone thought I was just a guard. The dinner continued, golden lights draping over faces that had no idea a storm was quietly forming right among them. I stayed calm, breathing steady, eyes roaming the courtyard as if taking in the scenery, but every movement was being catalogued in my mind. I saw the young man slip away through a corridor leading to the back kitchen. Minutes later, someone else emerged from the opposite direction, also in server uniform, but with a strange gait, strides too long for normal waitstaff, eyes scanning each group of guests a bit too thoroughly. I left the table again, heading toward the auxiliary service area at the edge of the garden, where the kitchen lights cast only faint shadows. From there, I could hear dishwashers humming, staff calling out food orders, and a faint conversation filtering through a barely opened storage room door. The detonation timing is during the toast, a man's voice whispered with a southern drawl. Right after the band switches songs. Another voice responded, faster, sharper. Focus on the primary target. He's carrying over 30 million tonight. Unlisted escrow funds. We don't need everything. We just need the old man. I felt my entire body tighten. The old man could only mean one person, my father, Robert Mitchell. He had just finalized a cross-border financial partnership, including an escrow amount not yet entered into any official record. If they had that information, someone on the inside was clearly feeding them. I stepped back, pulled out my phone and texted Melissa, not a robbery. Kidnapping. Target is my father. She called immediately. I answered while walking toward the narrow hallway behind the catering prep area. Are you sure? I heard them clearly. They don't want the items. They want the person. And they know about the unreported money. There's definitely an internal leak. I'll alert the logistics crew, but most are civilian security. No one's equipped to handle this if it escalates. I know. I'm calling Ethan. Melissa hesitated. Are you sure you want to pull him into this? I don't have another choice. I ended the call and opened my contact list, finding the name I hadn't touched in over 3 years. Ethan Brooks. We had once served together on an international counterterrorism mission. He later transferred to federal ops, while I moved into high-level civil defense. The few times we'd seen each other again were at strategy conferences or cross-agency investigations. I called. He answered after the third ring. Anna. His voice was low, alert, like he already suspected something. I need you in Malibu. West Shore Resort. There may be an organized kidnapping tonight. Target is a high-profile guest. I overheard references to a trigger moment and assets worth millions. Are there weapons? I haven't seen guns yet, but the coordination is tight. Internal personnel appear to be compromised. Do you have suspect IDs? Not yet. Only physical descriptions. I can send as soon as you arrive. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Send coordinates and any images if possible. I'll come with 2 of my team. No contact with local police. We don't want leaks. I sent the location, followed by quick descriptions of the 3 individuals I had identified. Fake uniforms. Odd behavior. Earpieces. When I returned to the main ballroom, everything appeared perfectly normal. My father was giving a thank you speech, Catherine smiling softly beside him. I moved to my table and sat down, keeping one hand beneath the tablecloth where my small handgun lay silently in its holster. I hadn't brought heavy weapons. As a guest, I wasn't allowed to, but I had enough to delay an attacker, if it came to that. Melissa approached and gently placed a glass of lemonade in front of me. I noticed a tiny piece of paper stuck to the bottom of the glass. She walked past without looking back. I waited 10 seconds, picked up the glass, took a pretend sip, then casually covered it with a napkin and peeled the note free. Confirmed, 4 imposters. 2 in kitchen, 1 in tech wing, 1 unknown location. All wearing earpieces. I scanned the room. Guests were still toasting. Soft music drifted across the garden. But inside me, everything was shifting into red alert. I stood up and walked toward the east restroom. I needed time to think, to mentally redraw the resort's blind spots, places without cameras, exits rarely used. I had memorized the resort layout years ago when I was a regional ops coordinator. 10 minutes later, Ethan texted, "We've arrived." Not entering main ballroom. In basement garage. Need access route. I snapped a picture of the resort's map, marked a path from the garage to the auxiliary restaurant and sent it. No early interference. Wait for signal. Move only when target is engaged. I returned to the ballroom just as the toast began. The music shifted to a classical arrangement. Catherine stood to deliver her blessing. For a split second, the atmosphere felt heavy, not from her words but from the cold shiver running down my spine. Something was about to go wrong. I moved to the left side of the stage, scanning every server, every movement. A man emerged from the kitchen hallway, carrying a tray of wine glasses. What caught my eye wasn't the tray, but the telltale shape pressed under the back of his shirt, a compact semi-automatic handgun. I reached up to my ear and gently tapped the hidden mic under my hair. Armed. Repeat. He's armed. I looked toward the stage. My father was walking up to deliver his final thanks. The man with the tray was heading in that direction. Ethan replied briskly, moving in. I set down my water glass, pulled out a small notepad, scribbled 3 coded symbols, then moved swiftly toward the nearest table. A confrontation was approaching. And I couldn't let the man who had once dismissed my worth become the pawn in a game he didn't even know he was part of. As the music ended, the garden fell into a moment of stillness. My father finished his words. Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. A light breeze rippled through the hedges. I glanced toward the kitchen hallway. The man with the tray was gone. Melissa appeared behind the stage, her eyes sharp. A single nod passed between us. And then gunshots. Not 1 but 2. No one was hit, but the sound ripped through the air like a thunderclap. Screams erupted. Guests scrambled from their seats, gowns snagging, chairs crashing, wine splashing across the grass. Some people fell, others trampled. The chandeliers swayed. A crystal flute shattered inches from where I stood. 3 servers now stood with weapons drawn, lower faces masked in black. They formed a triangular perimeter around the stage. One of them shouted. Everyone stay where you are. Don't move. We don't want blood, but we won't hesitate. From the stage, Catherine cried out. Robert. Oh my God, Robert. She reached for my father, but he stood frozen, pale as stone. The leader stepped forward, pointing straight at my father. Mister. You're coming with us. No. No one else needs to get involved. I couldn't wait any longer. I stepped out from the row of chairs on the left, my voice rising, clear and steady. Stop. Everyone turned. All of them. The attackers. My father. Even the guests hiding under the tables. I took another step forward, raised both hands to chest level. No lowering, no backing down. My name is Anna Mitchell. Senior Security Strategist with Sentinel Group. I've been tracking you since the start of this event. And I'm telling you now, you're not leaving here with anyone. The ringleader squinted. A security staffer making threats like that? I stared him down. Wrong. I'm the one you underestimated. And that's your first mistake. The air turned heavy. I could hear the sharp breathing of guests crouched behind the white curtains. Catherine was now sitting fully on the ground, clutching her head. My father hadn't moved. I saw raw panic in his eyes. One of the men stepped toward me, still holding his gun steady but hadn't pulled the trigger. Back off. This isn't your fight. I gave a thin smile. If you thought you could pull this off at a venue staffed by trained internal personnel, you picked the wrong wedding. The ringleader turned to his two men. Take him. And her, hold her down. I seized the only window I had. My team has the perimeter. Federal agents are already on site. You've got 3 minutes to think this through. They paused. The ringleader growled. You threatening me? I slowly lowered my right hand and produced my Sentinel Ops badge, marked with the Homeland Security Affiliate seal. His eyes darted. He'd seen that emblem before. He knew what it meant. Tension climbed higher. I heard soft footfalls behind the platform. Ethan and 2 of his officers were in position. One man near the tech area started inching back, his eyes twitching, nerves visibly fraying. The ringleader shouted, If anyone moves, I shoot. That was when my father truly grasped what was unfolding. He stammered, Anna, what's happening? Shut up, one of the men snapped, pointing his gun straight at him. Catherine screamed. I didn't let another second pass. I shouted and signaled. Ethan. Now. 3 sharp bursts rang out at once. Not kill shots but stun rounds. Special rounds used in internal operations, designed to disorient targets and distort their field of vision for a few seconds. A flash of white light erupted and the sound tore through my ears. But I pushed straight toward the man holding a gun near my father, shoving his arm aside before he could fire. The bullet fired upward, missing everyone. I slammed my elbow into his jaw, knocking him to the ground. Another man tried to pull a weapon from his back, but Ethan tackled him from behind, locking down both arms. Ethan's third officer intercepted the last attacker as he tried to flee toward the hallway. The entire takedown lasted less than 30 seconds. Heavy breathing, sobbing, the sound of shattered glass lingered in the air. I turned toward my father. He stood there wide-eyed, staring at me. His expensive suit now dusted from brushing against a table during the scuffle. He said nothing. His mouth opened and closed, searching for something to say. I walked over and gently grabbed Catherine's trembling hands. Are you okay? She nodded faintly, her face pale. I turned back to my father. Welcome to my world. He still didn't speak. Moments later, as local police arrived on scene, I removed my glove, pulled off my earpiece and signaled Ethan. They were just the surface layer. Someone on the inside fed them info. Check phones, devices, any connections to internal systems. Ethan nodded. This runs deeper than we thought. I stood still amid the wreckage of the celebration. The smell of spent stun rounds still hung in the air. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. But I knew, nothing from this point on would be the same. Especially not for my father. Because he saw me not as the security guard at the gate, but as the person standing between him and death. And I didn't flinch. The local police were on site, but federal agents and SWAT were still en route. A delay of just a few minutes in a situation like this could mean the difference between life and death. I knew that well. And so did they. After the first 3 were taken down, it seemed like things had settled. But I quickly noticed there was one more link in their plan, still hidden. A younger man, shorter, stocky, his catering cap tilted slightly, was slowly moving toward the stage where Catherine and my father still stood. His hand was clenched around something inside his jacket pocket. Our eyes locked at the exact moment he pulled out a small handgun, raised it in a blur and pointed it directly at Catherine's head. "One more step and I shoot," he screamed. Her scream pierced through the chaos. My father stumbled backward, horrified, watching his fiancée trapped in the iron grip of a stranger. A deadly silence fell. The sirens wailing in the distance did nothing to ease the crushing feeling of helplessness wrapping around my chest. I raised my hand, palm open, and kept my voice as calm as I could. "Don't do this. You're heading the wrong way." "Shut up," he shouted. "I know who you are. Take one more step and this head goes flying." I could see his finger resting on the trigger. Catherine froze, tears streaming down her face. She didn't move a muscle. She was no longer the powerful businesswoman on magazine covers. She was a woman with her life hanging in the balance of a panicked man's decision. I drew in a slow breath and didn't look at him. I looked straight into Catherine's eyes. They were pleading, desperate but still aware. "You don't want to kill anyone," I said slowly, stepping half a pace to the left, easing out of his direct line of sight. "If you did, you would have already pulled the trigger." I said, "Back off. We already have 3 of your guys," I continued, voice steady. "You really think you still have a way out?" He gripped tighter, pressing the barrel to Catherine's temple. I saw a bead of sweat drop from his forehead onto his cheek. That was the crack. "We just wanted the money. We weren't supposed to kill anybody." I stepped another half pace closer, just enough to notice him shifting his weight backward, prepping to flee. I offered him an out. "There might still be a way. Let her go. I'll talk to the cops. I'll push for a live arrest. But if you shoot now, every deal ends." "Negotiation." He gave a dry, twisted laugh. "I'm holding a hostage. You think you're in any position to negotiate?" I slowly lowered my right hand, resting it on my hip, right over the emergency belt where I had my short blade hidden. "What's your name?" He flinched slightly. "What?" "I asked for your name. It's easier to talk if I can call you something." "Derek." "Derek, listen to me." I took another half step forward, now only about 12 feet away. "You're not a bad person. You're in a bad situation. I know you didn't plan to kill anyone." Your hand's shaking. "There's no way out. There's always a way. You just have to make the right choice. Let her go. Drop the gun. Everyone stays alive. That's a win, Derek." I saw his eyes flicker. Catherine whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't shoot." I took one last step. 10 feet. I could lunge in less than a second. But I didn't. I simply held out my left hand, inviting him to choose. "You can decide, Derek. Right now." He looked at me, then at Catherine. His arms dropped half an inch. And I knew that was my only window. I sprang forward, sweeping my right arm around his gun hand, twisting his wrist back and using my hip to shift his balance. Catherine stumbled backward. The gun hit the grass. Derek tried to fight back, but I forced him to the ground, my knee pressing into his shoulder, one hand locking down his left wrist. He shouted, squirmed, but his strength was fading. Ethan and another officer rushed in, securing him in cuffs. I gasped for air, sweat pouring down my face. Catherine sat on the ground, hands covering her face, sobbing. My father stood nearby, frozen like stone, eyes locked on me. I walked over and gently helped her up. "We're safe now," I whispered. "It's over." And in that moment of quiet, in the dim light of the ruined reception hall, with sirens still echoing in the distance, I turned and met my father's gaze. No more disdain. No more cold indifference. Just shock. And something that looked a lot like regret. I looked at him for a moment, then turned away. I didn't need questions. I wasn't ready for answers. All I knew was this: I had made the right choice. Not for recognition, but to protect life, even when it doesn't thank you. I had just taken down the last assailant in the hall when another scream rang out from the kitchen, followed by the crash of broken dishes. I spun around. Another man, who seemed to be the actual leader, was dragging my father toward the back door, a handgun pressed to his waist. "Move it. Want to die here." he growled, yanking and pulling, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. I didn't hesitate. My left shoulder still bled from earlier, but I bolted after them. The pain blurred under a rush of adrenaline and something deeper. Not a soldier's duty, but a daughter's instinct. I dashed toward the kitchen door, where their shadows were fading into the service hallway. My bare feet slid slightly on the wet tile from the sink, but I didn't stop. He was dragging my father toward the back exit. Poorly lit, no cameras, and only one low brick wall separating it from the main road. "Stop!" I yelled. "Let him go." He turned. Recognizing me as the one who had dismantled their whole plan in the ballroom, he sneered. "You trying to be the hero again? Go back to your fancy champagne glasses." He turned back and shoved the gun harder into my father's side, making him gasp. But my eyes stayed fixed on his grip. He was trembling, breathing hard. He was panicking. I slowed my steps, keeping enough distance not to spook him, but close enough to react. "You won't make it out," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Police have the entire perimeter locked down. Whatever you do now is pointless." "Shut up," he shouted. "I've still got a hostage. You want to see your dad die right now, take one more step." I looked at my father. His eyes were wide with fear, not just from the gun but from something else. He was seeing me differently. Not as the just security daughter he once dismissed, but as someone he hadn't really seen until now. I gripped the folded knife hidden in my sleeve and edged slightly to the left, forcing him to pivot with me. He was starting to lose his sense of orientation. "You don't get it," I kept talking. "I'm not playing hero. I'm just doing what I've trained over 10 years to do: protect those who need protecting." We entered the resort's back courtyard, a small stone-covered area with low shrubs and a wooden fence separating it from the road. The night wind cut through my blood-stained shirt. He pushed my father forward, then suddenly spun around, pulling him tight and aiming the gun directly at me. "Don't move another inch. I swear I'll shoot," he yelled, voice shaking. I raised both hands high, not moving. My mind raced, calculating angles, reaction times, his breathing rhythm. I noticed his left heel was off balance, weight shifting. His gun hand drooped slightly. Eyes distracted. Just one heartbeat. I twisted left and lunged, 3 quick strides. I grabbed his gun arm, drove my good shoulder forward despite the pain, and wrenched his wrist behind his back. My father was flung aside. I slammed the man to the ground, pinning him, my knee crushing his wrist until the weapon clattered free. He kicked and thrashed wildly, but it was over. I pulled out my spare cuffs and locked his hands around the nearby metal railing. At that exact moment, flashing police lights reflected against the resort's back wall, and the heavy footsteps of tactical units thundered toward us. I slumped down beside a planter, panting, eyes on my father. He was sitting against the wall, hands still trembling but gaze locked on me. "Anna," he rasped. I looked up, met his eyes. A moment of confusion, then something deeper, like the fog of 10 estranged years had lifted. He slowly reached out a hand toward me. I stepped over, helped him up. He said nothing more. Just held onto my hand tightly, like he feared I might vanish. Behind us, the cuffed man lay limp, blood trickling from his forehead after the takedown. Officers stormed the yard, scanning the area, securing the scene. Inside, the ballroom lights still flickered. Guests had been evacuated. Only a handful of officers, my father and I, remained in the silent courtyard, surrounded by the scent of wet grass and the smoky sting of gunpowder. I bent down to pick up the fallen gun, removed the magazine, did a quick check, then handed it to the nearest officer. "You're an agent?" he asked. I didn't respond right away. I simply nodded, then looked over at my father, the man who once said I was just security. Just a few hours after I handed over the scene to law enforcement and retreated to the staff room upstairs in the resort, the phone in my jacket pocket wouldn't stop buzzing. I didn't need to look at it to know what was happening. The police media team and national press had arrived almost immediately after the incident. Though I hadn't answered a single reporter, surveillance footage, guest camera clips, and even event crew videos had already made their way onto news networks across the country. Headline after headline flashed across the screen as I scrolled. "Bride rejected by her father walks into danger and saves his life at the wedding." Security expert Anna Mitchell, the unexpected hero at the billionaire's wedding. Daughter's cold reaction after saving her father sparks nationwide debate. The videos went viral in minutes. One clip captured the exact moment I stepped out into the ballroom, facing the armed men, my voice steady and firm. "I'm the security expert. And none of you are leaving here with anyone." That 10-second video alone was shared hundreds of thousands of times overnight. Thousands of comments poured in, most of them admiring, praising. But there were plenty of others, questioning the coldness in my eyes when I looked at my father afterward. I wasn't surprised, because deep down the anger hadn't faded. Not because he once introduced me as just security, but because even in that life-or-death moment he still didn't truly understand who I was. The next morning, I was invited to a private briefing room by a representative of the local police. When I stepped in, I saw my father already seated. His face was pale, his eyes exhausted. But the usual arrogance was gone. The lead investigator looked at both of us, then spoke slowly and firmly. "Mr. Robert Mitchell, we've reviewed Ms. Anna's full statement, pulled security footage and audio devices from the scene. There's no doubt, the target of the attack was you. The suspects planned to abduct you, move you to another location for ransom, or worse, based on the billion-dollar deal you're currently involved in." My father remained silent, his hands clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. No one in the room said a word. I stood against the wall, watching his reaction without speaking. The officer continued. "And if it weren't for Ms. Anna's decisive actions, her early detection, coordination with security, and direct intervention to rescue you, we might be looking at a murder or kidnapping case this morning." My father lowered his head, his lips trembling before he whispered. "I didn't know." I took a few steps forward. My voice wasn't loud, but every word seemed to echo through the thick silence of the small room. "You introduced me in front of all your guests as, 'This is my daughter, just security.'" He looked up at me. His eyes were glassy. "And the one who was just security," I said slowly, "is the one who saved your life." I wasn't trying to get revenge. I didn't need an apology. But I needed him to see, for once, that I wasn't just a shadow standing at the edge of his spotlight. He gave a slight nod. I was wrong. About more than one thing. I didn't answer. I turned to the investigator, finished our final exchange, then walked out. Out in the hallway, Catherine was standing there. Her hair was a mess, her eyes still streaked from tears. She looked at me without her usual air of nobility, without the elegance of afternoon teas. She stepped closer but didn't speak right away. I was about to walk past when she gently reached out and held my hand. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting that man, no matter what he's done to you, die in humiliation." I said nothing, but something inside me softened. Back in the main hall, the event crew had nearly finished cleaning up. The grand tables were gone, chairs stacked, linens folded. But staff were still whispering, "That's her. The one who took down the whole crew." A young worker handed me the wallet and phone I'd dropped yesterday. When I thanked her, she mumbled, "You really make me want to join the military." I let out a soft laugh. I hadn't laughed like that in a long time. As I stepped outside, the morning sun filtered through tall trees. The air was filled with pine and ocean salt. I looked at my left shoulder, bandaged but no longer aching. On my way back to the room, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Ethan calling. "Everything okay now?" he asked. "It's okay. You made it in time. Let me know if you need anything. I've submitted everything to federal channels. The media might blow this up, but the military will handle things quietly. It won't affect your record. Thank you." I ended the call. And inside me, a steady truth beat like a drum. I don't need outside validation anymore. I've spent long enough in the shadows of someone else's spotlight. I don't need their lights. I just need them to see me, for the woman who stayed silent for years, who was pushed aside like an afterthought, the one they called just security, who stood in the line of fire and saved her father's life. After the incident, the resort temporarily shut down for investigation. Guests were escorted out by armored security vans, and I returned to the modest staff room I'd rented as a regular team member. I didn't need luxury. I didn't want a spotlight. But that morning, as I shut the door behind me, there was a soft knock. I opened it. It was my father. Robert Mitchell was no longer wearing his perfectly pressed suit silk tie, or the confident air of a man who once sat at negotiation tables worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He stood there in a wrinkled white dress shirt, his face weary, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept all night. In his hand was a steaming cup of coffee. "Brought you coffee," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Still like medium roast, right?" I nodded but didn't take it right away. He understood, set the cup down on the small table by the door, then stepped back. His eyes never looked at me directly, just flickered toward me then away again. "May I come in?" I stood still for a few seconds, then nodded. He stepped into the small room. It wasn't a suite. Just a standard room, thin blanket, wooden desk, a window that looked out over the lake. He glanced around, then slowly sat down in the chair beside the bed, right where I had laid my military jacket the day before. "I saw everything," he said quietly. "The video from the kitchen, the footage of you running out. All of it. I also heard the officer's full statements." I didn't say anything. I waited. For the first time in my life, I don't have words for what I'm feeling. Not because I was almost kidnapped. Not because the deal collapsed. But because I nearly lost the most valuable thing I ever had. I kept looking at him. Not with anger. Not with softness either. I wanted to hear it all. He took a deep breath, his voice catching. "I'm sorry, Anna. Not just for calling you security, but for looking at you with eyes no father should ever turn on his daughter. I was blinded by my obsession with success, with image, with pride. And I forgot that the woman sitting in front of me today never needed my validation. She was stronger than anyone else I've ever known." I turned toward the window. The morning sun had risen, soft like silk draped across the lake. I didn't cry, but somewhere inside me something long dormant stirred. "I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive," I said slowly. "Not because of the things you said, but because for years I had to learn to stand on my own, when the one person I waited for was the first to turn his back." He nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I just hope for a chance to start over. A meal. A phone call. Anything you'd allow to begin again." I looked at him. And in his eyes for the first time there was no ego. No legacy. No power. Just a father, fragile but honest. I nodded gently. "Hey," I said. "But you'll have to learn how to be the father of someone like me. Someone who doesn't need protection, only respect." He let out a quiet laugh even as tears fell. "I understand." 2 weeks later, I was summoned back to Washington for a special ceremony hosted by the federal agency. My name was called in the Grand Hall with veterans, former colleagues, and complete strangers in the audience. I walked to the stage wearing a simple black suit. Nothing fancy. The person presenting my medal was a general who had once led me during a campaign in the Middle East. As he pinned the insignia to my left chest, he paused and smiled. "I never doubted your ability. But today, you've shown the whole country exactly what you're made of." The whole hall stood to applaud. But I didn't look down. I looked up, at the large banner across the stage that read, "Honoring those who stand when the world bows down." The ceremony ended with my speech. I stepped up to the microphone, stared out at the hundreds of faces, and began in a calm voice. "I'm not standing here for a title. I'm here for something simpler. Because I know what it's like when no one believes in you, when no one says your name right, when no one stands beside you. And in those moments you have to choose, rise or quietly endure." I paused. The room held its breath. "The true value of a person," I continued, "isn't in the label others give you. It's in whether you're willing to stand, to act, and to hold your ground, even if you're the only one doing it." I stepped back from the mic and bowed. The applause roared like thunder. But inside me it wasn't triumph I felt. It was peace. I was no longer the girl standing outside a boardroom waiting for my father to say my name. I was no longer just a soldier taking orders. I was now a woman, a warrior, a daughter who had learned to rise, and to face the truth no matter how bitter. And this journey at last had begun again, from the very place I thought I had lost everything. What about you? If it were you, reduced, dismissed, labeled something that never reflected your worth by the very people meant to love you, would you have walked away in silence or stood up to prove who you really are? I'm not telling this story for praise. I'm telling it as a reminder, both to myself and maybe someone listening right now, that sometimes the strongest person in the family is the one most underestimated. That courage doesn't always look like a weapon. It's often just the decision to take one more step forward when everyone else has turned away. Family can wound us deeper than anyone else. But family, if we're brave enough to confront and rebuild it, can also become our greatest source of strength. If you've ever felt abandoned, misjudged, or simply searching for your place among the people you once trusted, I hope my story is a small encouragement on your path. What do you think? Have you ever had to reclaim your worth from the very people who should have cherished it without question? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes, one honest story can be the beginning of healing. And if you'd like to stay with me on this journey, through stories of family, of quiet resilience, of moments that feel broken but reveal unexpected strength, don't forget to follow this channel. Because this life still holds so many voices that deserve to be heard. So many memories. So many women who dared to rise above judgment, to find themselves again.